Happy Friday, everybody. Happy Friday.
All
I
right,
was just reading.
so we are gonna begin our third and final panel. So if everyone wants to work their way back to our seats, and once again, thank you again to everybody at home for watching today, and keep answering those real estate CE questions if you need those continuing ed credits. Also, a quick reminder to everybody that's in attendance, if you do need those real estate CE credits, make sure, don't forget, sign out when you leave today in person, and make sure you sign out online. So on to our last panel. Moderating is Chris, with who's partner with BKV Group. And I'm not Chris, I always muster your last name, so we're just gonna go Chris. But Chris is gonna kick the session off with a football story. Everybody likes football. Chris, take it away.
All right, good morning, everyone. Chris Belkovich, BKV Group architect. So I'm in a walking boot today, and getting a little bit of a hard time, but rightfully so. So Thanksgiving morning.
Can you check your mic quick? Make sure it's not on mute.
Is it working or no?
That sounds like it's on mute.
I'll try. Hello. There we go. All right.
There you go.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Chris Belkovich, partner and architect with BKV Group. Happy to be here and be moderator this morning. And as Jeff was alluding to, I'm in a walking boot today and getting a bit of a hard time, but rightfully so. Thanksgiving morning, I was playing in a friendly, just one-hand touch game of football, and knowing I'm getting a little older, so I got to take it a little easier, and I was, but still managed, when throwing a pass, to rupture my Achilles. So not going to let it, keep me from coming. So I'm in, but it's as they say, keep it easier. And even when I did, it didn't matter. So I don't know. But I also heard Kobe Bryant, after rupturing his Achilles, went up and still made 2 free throws in an NBA game. So he's got me beat.
You're gonna go play in an NBA game now?
Yeah, I don't think so. So with that, I'm a little bit more about me. As an architect at BKV Group, I work on a number of affordable housing projects. A lot of them happen to be tax credit projects, locally and nationally as well. Happy to be part of the panel and promote and support affordable housing.
Hi there, I'm Josh Dye, the Marketing and Outreach Manager for Housing Link. Housing Link's a nonprofit organization that has served Minnesota for nearly 25 years. We operate a website that people use to search, low to moderate income renters use to search for affordable rental housing. We get about 1 million searches for housing each year on our site. We also have data and research that can help you understand median rents in your community and throughout the metro area, and some programs that help increase access for renters, particularly with barriers in their background, things like criminal background, lower credit scores, shaky rental history, to help them get into housing in a way that offsets some of the risk for the landlords as well.
All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm John Arago. I'm with Greater Minnesota Housing Fund. And Chris asked us to describe why we are passionate about affordable housing. And for me, I don't know what it is. It must be in my DNA. If for those of you who didn't get that, my dad started Common Bond. I'm the Director of Equity Investing at Greater Minnesota Housing Fund. We are the largest nonprofit CDFI in Minnesota. We were founded in 1996. So we're 25 years strong, celebrating safely, working at home. We offer a full complement of debt and equity products. Permanent mezz, construction, acquisition, pre-development financing. And I manage 2 subsidiaries of GMHF, Minnesota Equity Fund, which is our tax credit investing side, and our NOAA Impact Fund, which invests in naturally occurring affordable housing, which we will talk about today.
I guess that's my cue. Is this on? Good morning, everybody. I'm Sarah Harris. I'm the Executive Vice President of Strategy, Partnership, and Production for Aon Housing. What the heck does that mean? That means I run our housing development and acquisition team. But also it means I'm focused on partnerships in our community that can help to make our housing better for our community. I started my career some 35 years ago and spent most of that time in commercial real estate, building public-private partnerships. And about 2 years ago, I realized that the number one issue that affects every single part of our community is stable housing. It's the upstream solution to so many of the downstream issues that we are facing in our community, whether that's the education gap, employee recruitment, equity, crime reduction, you name it, public health care cost, all of these things are impacted by housing. So I joined Aon in March of 2020. Think about that timing. And in March of 2020, when I joined Aon, at that time, we had just under 6,000 units of affordable housing. We are a nonprofit owner operator, and we formed in the mid-1980s as a result of the Minneapolis Convention Center taking out some 200 units of affordable housing in downtown Minneapolis on the heels of so many other units that had been lost. And so the Downtown Faith Congregations formed this nonprofit at the time called Central Community Housing Trust to start bringing more affordable housing back into our community. And I'll talk more about that as we go.
I'm Angela Christie. I am head of the tax credit housing and community development practice at Faegre Drinker, a law firm in Minneapolis and many other places. I have been involved in affordable housing about as long as Sarah has been involved in development, started representing Aon in 1986. So it gives you a sense of how long I've been doing this. I've done over 300 LIHTC projects and now have also done a number of NOAA projects, HUD projects. A lot of you in the room know me, know how passionate I am about affordable housing, about solving problems, and how I love complex, resolving complex deals and getting them to closing and trying to figure out the way to maximize resources. So that's my passion.
Good morning. My name is Katie Anthony. I'm Director of Development with Schaefer Richardson. Schaefer Richardson is a local commercial real estate firm. I head our development group. We do market rate and affordable multifamily development, as well as some historic and adaptive reuse type projects. We had a call yesterday afternoon with this panel and realized that there was maybe a little bit of a difference of opinion on what the topic was. And so my role, we do not do what's thought of as NOAA, but we have some fantastic experts in that space. And so one of my roles here is to provide the non-NOAA perspective as a market rate developer and as someone who does traditional LIHTC development.
Me too. My name is Jeff Von Felt. I'm with Duffy Development. We're a for-profit affordable housing developer in the Twin Cities here. We've got about 850 units that we own and manage with our in-house management company, and continue to try and crack this nut as we keep going forward. So here to provide any information I can.
All right, thank you, everybody. John, to kick us off, if you could define NOAA projects and some of the current issues.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that, Chris. So for those of you who don't know, NOAA properties are basically Class B, Class C rental properties. Think about your classic 2.5-story walk-up, in the suburbs primarily, but also in the inner cities. Rents affordable at or below 60% AMI, some of them even well below that, 50 or even 40% AMI. The issue is that speculators are buying these properties, displacing all of the residents who generally are very low income people. They're repositioning these properties by doing some, in some cases, cosmetic, in other cases, other types of improvements, adding amenities and that sort of thing, re-tenanting these buildings with higher income people. And so we're losing our, what is really the largest supply of affordable housing that we have. About 70% of the affordable housing in the Twin Cities is NOAA. It's not tax credit deals, it's NOAA properties. And so, the main problem we have is, when low income residents are competing for housing, they lose every time. And a case study of this is Commons at Penn, now rebranded to be the Concierge. This is, 698 one-bedroom units in Richfield, it's across from Best Buy. It housed about 2,200 people, many couples with school-age children. It was purchased in 2015 for $59,000 a unit, $41 million. The buyer evicted everybody, created new residency standards, stopped accepting Section 8. It was a major disruption to all those residents, but also the broader community, including the school district, which lost a number of students. That developer invested $13 million in a renovation, which is great for the real estate. Increased the rents by 30%. The rents were in the low 700s, then they were, $1,000 or more. That property retraded in 2019 for $95 million or $136,000 per unit. So you can see the economics behind what's happening. But what's happening to the people is what, concerns Greater Minnesota Housing Fund and Aon and many others. If you're interested, TPT did an excellent documentary on that project called Sold Out. If you Google Sold Out, I'm sure you'll find it. It's an hour long. There's interviews with the residents. It's a fantastic resource. The problem with the concierge is that it's not just a one-time event. From 2014 to 2018, according to census data, the Twin Cities metro area lost 32,000 units of affordable NOAA housing, 60% AMI or below. And in that time, we built 5,300 units. So we're losing a net of 5,300 units, affordable units every year. And, this has been an ongoing issue, since, probably the last 10 years, but really accelerated. And it's only a matter of time if we don't start preserving some of these NOAA properties. It's only a matter of time before they're gone. And like I said before, it's the largest resource of affordable housing we have. So that's, broad brush, the framework and the concern, what NOAA is and what the concern is about it.
Sarah, at Aon, as a group that actively is trying to preserve some of these buildings as NOAA, what obstacles are you seeing, and why does Aon feel we need it?
What obstacles are we seeing? How long do you all have? You're kind of looking like you want to get out the door, but the obstacles really boil down to three pretty easy things. Number one is timing. We are competing with the market. The market has nimble capital ready to go, and closings are in 90 to 120 days. And the sources of funds that we need to cobble together don't cobble together easily, let alone in 90 to 120 days. So number one, timing. Number two, funding. I just mentioned that we have to compete with the market. We're not just competing on timing, we're competing on price. And for us to pay the price that the market is paying, when the market is going to turn around and upscale the units and have the rents that support that price, we don't do that. And so we need to find a lot of soft sources in order to cover a gap. And those soft sources are not always, but typically from public jurisdictions, and they don't move quickly, and they also don't have a lot of sources. So it's not just one source, it's multiple sources. And then we get into the issue of the residents themselves. And oftentimes, these residents are already cost burdened living in these NOAA units. NOAA is naturally occurring, so it's not regulated affordability. Rents are usually, as John mentioned, in that sometimes 40, 50, even maybe up to the 60% AMI. And the residents that are living there are already paying more of their income than they can really afford for those rents. And so we need to find a way to improve the property, take care of the long-standing kind of end of useful life issues that are happening in that property, and do it in a way that doesn't increase the rents as we're doing it. And I know Angela is going to speak to some of the kind of resource issues and regulatory issues that go with NOAA. And you layer all of those on top of what's happening with NOAA, and that 90 to 120 days starts to look even more immense. But why is it important? I always like to lead with this, but I'm going to finish with it now. These are our essential workers. We've spent the last 2 years talking about our first responders, our essential workers, all of the people that we know we need in our community, that we know we need in our workforce, and yet we aren't housing them. And so if we aren't able to keep this NOAA affordable and we aren't able to provide this housing, where are these people going to go? They're going to go somewhere else. We won't have them working in our community. Our school systems will suffer, as John mentioned, our workforces are going to suffer, and our overall community is going to suffer as a result. We need to find a way to support these people in our community in housing. And I would note that in addition to the loss of units that John mentioned, because we're losing so much NOAA every year, we are also increasing our population over the next 10 years. The Met Council is projecting that our population will increase by, I believe it's 50,000 per year or something. Anyhow, and with that population increase, over half of the people are going to be low-income wage earners. So it isn't just the units that we're losing, it's also the folks that we are attracting to our community that need housing. And so we're heading the wrong direction with our housing supply, and we need to correct that quickly, or we are going to start looking like the coastal communities when it comes to housing and homelessness.
Angela, could you follow up a bit more on that? I mean, Sarah really mentioned that some of the obstacles for the funding and the timelines on those. What's your experience? What are you seeing? And what may be some ways to improve what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, talking about sort of what the problems are, it's the fact of extreme change. The differences in timing between doing a LIHTC project and doing a NOAA project are immense. I mean, they're just totally different worlds in terms of, am I not on?
You're not.
I was trying to talk really loud, but this works better. The first thing I will say is, and don't run up and get it right now, but those of you that know me, I have to write something. I'm a lawyer, so I do have written materials that are up on the front table here that you can pick up as you go. So you don't have to take notes. It also includes a link to the site that John talked about in terms of the Richfield project. Some discussion of that. At the beginning of it is a discussion of the need for affordable housing. This crowd doesn't need to know that, but hopefully it gives you some talking points. I originally wrote this for a group, the American College of Real Estate Lawyers, for a presentation I did in Nashville. They did need to know about it. Most of them are not affordable housing lawyers, and I wanted to give them some information. So maybe you can pass it along to those that you know that aren't quite as informed about the need for affordable housing. But the need for affordable housing then gets us to NOAA, because the primary source of affordable housing in this country is NOAA. It's not tax credit. And so let's figure out some of the things that are standing between, acquiring NOAA projects, between a purchase agreement and getting closed on a NOAA project. One of the things, and not to insult John, but some of the equity investors and subordinate lenders and lenders aren't very fond of subordinate loans. Now, that creates a problem, because to do these deals, like any other financing of affordable housing, you get a first mortgage and then you need some subordinate debt. There's a particular reason that you need subordinate debt. And everybody's been talking about 4D or LRC tax classification. But one of the important components of doing a NOAA project is getting LRC classification and reducing your property taxes. So one of the ways that you can get LRC, other than tax credits, is if you get money from a governmental entity and you enter into a long-term declaration or a declaration committing 20% of the units at 50 or 40 at 60. Now, as you know, LRC only applies to the number of units that are actually affordable. So usually we've got a declaration that covers all 100 units. So if you have a prohibition on subordinate financing, you can't get the money from the governmental entity to get LRC tax classification. One of the good things about LRC tax classification is that when we enter into those declarations, most governmental entities will allow us to leave over income tenants in place. They're not going to require displacement. So the LRC declaration will usually say that you have to get income certifications and bring in new tenants So sort of next available unit rule if you're, doing LIHTC, but for an open unit, then you have to bring in an eligible tenant, but you don't have to kick out any of your over income tenants, which is an important, consideration because you don't want to know a project to displace people. Another challenge is a lot of these projects we're trying to get TIF. First, there's a problem with timing. As you know, TIF, you're going to have a TIF plan. You have to have a public hearing. You have to, enter into agreements. How are you going to do that in 90 to 120 days? Real challenge to try to get the TIF in place up front. The other problem is typically NOAA projects have not been income certifying tenants. So you don't have, when you're doing your due diligence, you don't have information other than the application, form from the tenant as to what their incomes are. And as we all know, without verification, those may or may not be accurate. And so you don't have the documentation of TIF qualification. So if you're going to the governmental entity and saying, we want TIF, they're going to say, well, how can we give it to you up front? Because you don't have any income certification. So we might give it to you in a year, but then you don't have the money sitting on the table for your initial closing. So timing and income qualification are both issues with respect to NOAA projects. Preserving LIHTC eligibility is also a potential issue. You want to rehab these projects. Governmental entities want you to do huge amounts of rehab. You don't have the resources. So if you could do a low-income housing tax credit project at some point, that would be a benefit. But if you bring in an equity investor, you potentially are breaking your 10-year hold for doing an acquisition credit. So one idea, and we're just, haven't done one yet, but we're looking potentially at doing 501c3 bonds on an interim basis before bringing in equity investor. So you do a deal with 501c3 bonds and keep it in tax exempt ownership so that you end up with preserving your 10-year hold. And then at some point in the near future, a couple of years when you can apply for tax credits, do a tax credit project. So those are a few of my ideas about things that you can do, and my timer's going off, so I might need to be quiet. So those are some things. And I think
Thank you on that. Josh, how do you see from the renter's perspective of their experience?
Yeah, so one thing just from a very practical standpoint, on our website at housinglink.org, we have a data and research section where we track the number of NOAA vacancies by bedroom month by month, as well as some median rents and affordability in general. But we come in at sort of the very end of this process, which is what is the renter's experience looking for a place to live? And so when you get to a situation where in some cases they have a job and they can afford a place, or between their income and a subsidy like a housing choice voucher, now they can find a place that they can afford, but then they run up against screening criteria barriers. So people who have criminal backgrounds or recent evictions or lower credit scores, that then makes it hard for them to find a place to live. And so one of the things, a program that we started to address this is called Beyond Backgrounds. We started it about 4 years ago. And the way that Beyond Backgrounds works is a renter applies to get into the program. They have to have an eligible barrier and have an income or an income plus subsidy that makes it so that they can afford the place. Then they have a qualifying barrier like a criminal background, recent eviction, lower credit score. And what happens is if a property owner or manager rents to a Beyond Backgrounds participant, then that property owner manager gets free insurance up to $2,000. No cost to you, no inspection of the property, nothing along those lines. And if there's an issue like damage to the unit beyond what a security deposit covers, Beyond Backgrounds will provide up to $2,000 above and beyond that to help make the situation whole, or if there are any legal fees or other things. Well, Beyond Backgrounds, up to this point, 519 renters have been housed. And then we've had 11 claims against the risk fund in that period of time. And so you have this sort of like, you could say a higher risk type of renter, but with some appropriate supports and supports that are there for the landlord as well, where we check in on a monthly basis to see, did they pay their rent? Any other issues you'd like us to know about? That's become helpful. Where it's relevant now is that to maybe to this group or to some of your partners is that up to now, renters have had to apply through very specific entry points. They had to get referred from coordinated entry or a particular place. Well, next year, Beyond Backgrounds will get launched statewide where any renter who qualifies can apply. And so you may have more people reaching out and saying, hey, I'm interested in your property. I don't meet your screening criteria, but I'm a participant in the program. And we have seen some pretty good success in terms of renters with barriers finding housing and having success in it being something that works out both for the property owner as well as for the renter as well.
Switching gears a little bit, Katie, as you do new construction LIHTC deals, I'd like you to speak to that just a little bit as there's some differences, just maybe share that. But I think to Angela had an interesting comment of how could, bringing LIHTC into some of these NOAA projects, of your thoughts of how that could overlap and maybe be a tool if it was modified a little bit to be something that could help the public.
Sure. Well, I think a lot of the differences have been covered already. Sarah did a great job of talking about the timing, and really that being one of the main differences with a LIHTC deal is that you've got not just 6 months to a year, but oftentimes 5 years to get your financing in place before you close on a project. But and that being a challenge from a NOAA perspective, that you don't have the luxury to have that time to put all the points in place. I think also site selection is, there's more that goes into a LIHTC project in terms of scoring and getting your sources lined up. At the end of the day with NOAA, I think what I'm hearing is it really comes down to being able to compete with the market in terms of being able to buy it. So getting your sources in place, getting interest rate at a level, and ideally having the gap financing. I will say that on the operational side, the two strategies are not that different in terms of trying to keep your operational costs down. And we've heard from the other panels on some of the strategies that are out there and being worked on currently, 4D being one that would benefit LIHTC projects, as well as have the potential to benefit NOAA projects, where taxes are a huge part of your operating budget. And when you're trying to work your debt service calculation and make your model work on an acquisition, knowing that you can have those, you're operating your building at lower rents, but at least you have that offset by lower taxes as well. That's an important factor to being able to get what you need there. I think on the debt side, there's some debt products out there that focus on energy efficiency. So I think when you have a project that's NOAA has been around for a while, there's some really pretty low cost improvements, but it adds to all of the other capital improvements that need to happen with a product that's that old. So being able to obtain some rate beneficial debt that also helps you improve or lower your operating costs is a big benefit to both types of projects. I think on what was the other part of that question?
It was kind of thinking of the future. Could there be some overlap of LIHTC and NOAA maybe?
Well, I think, yeah, the 10-year rule is really the deal breaker for a quick acquisition. And so I think there's a couple strategies. I'm really intrigued by the strategy that you're approaching here, and I'll be curious to hear how that works. The other option is to take over the current ownership and everything that goes along with that to not actually have a acquisition in the same way and preserve the credit status, the LIHTC credit status for the acquisition credit down the road. So that's being done, but it's not for the faint of heart. And there are issues taking over someone else's entity and books, and potentially unforeseen challenges that come along with that.
Jeff, can you be additive to that a bit and maybe talk a bit more about site selection from your side on the LIHTC piece?
Yeah, I don't know how additive I can be to the NOAA piece of that, because we haven't been able to make something work on our end. I think part of it is that there is some greater support for nonprofit entities to do this than there is for profits. And as we kind of look out to the future and how these are put together, it becomes a little bit difficult for us, has been a little bit difficult for us to think about how that's going to work out a few years down the road. So unfortunately, we haven't gone in that direction. We've really been focused on new construction housing tax credit developments. And, you know, location wise, it's kind of the standard, you know, developer mantra of location, 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 with a little bit of a twist in that Minnesota housing kind of dictates a little bit where those locations are by giving location points based on various criteria. They have a very nice map on their website that you can utilize pretty quickly. And even though you might think that a particular location would seem to be good, without checking out that map, you really will be wasting a bunch of time and checking it not just once, but frequently. We recently had a site that was in greater Minnesota, top scoring, maybe one of the top scoring sites I've ever seen put together. And then the new round that came out, I don't know when they changed it, October or September, it basically kicked it right out. There was no way it was going to score efficiently. Lost its QTC, qualified census tract rating, lost all kinds of points all of a sudden. And that could have been, you know, a very expensive mistake if somebody were to move ahead. So continually following up on the Minnesota housing selection criteria is important. In general, we're looking, you know, we're primarily focused in the suburban area. I know you heard a little bit this morning that there needs to be more development in the suburbs. And that's really where we've done all of our development. Actually, we don't have anything in Minneapolis or St. Paul. And so we try and utilize our experience working with suburban communities, being able to give them good examples of good quality buildings and good quality management, which is, you know, a piece that's, I don't think, talked about enough with tax credit properties. They're complicated. They're more expensive to operate just from accounting side of things and compliance side of things. And you really need a good quality management company or in-house management. We do it in-house primarily to make that work out. So, but location. So along transit routes, we've got a number of properties along the North Star rail line. We're looking at a property right now along the future Botno rail location, and we try and be in those locations where there's frequent bus activity and options for people to get where they need to go. Job growth or jobs in place are important. Not so highly important in the metro area because people seem to go a lot of different places for work, but it doesn't hurt to be, you know, close to a business park or an area where workforce housing jobs are plentiful. You know, it could be a medical location. It could be, like I said, a business park area where there's lots of jobs. So we kind of stretch that area, widen it out in the Twin Cities, St. Cloud. We don't have anything in Rochester, but certainly that is a very hot market right now. But that's kind of where we try and stay. That's where our expertise seems to be.
Katie, back to you. On the, you know, it's interesting to think about if you start to kind of merge the two a bit, there already seems to be some bond capacity issues for LIHTC. You want to speak to that a little bit and some of your thinking there?
Sure. And just building on what Jeff said, so we've done all of our affordable work has been in Minneapolis and St. Paul. None of it has been in the suburbs. And part of the reason we only do 4% tax credit and bond type projects. And part of the reason is that we can't compete for bonds when we look for sites in the suburbs, because there are fewer qualified census tracts out there. So the scoring in and of itself matters less, but the ability to make the deal pencil to be competitive at lower income affordability does matter for new construction. And I think that's where NOAA and LIHTC can kind of work hand in hand, since the majority of the NOAA projects, I'm understanding, are the suburban communities. And so preserving those so that there is a geographical diversity in terms of where affordable housing is located is really important. The bond capacity issue ties right into this. As bonds are more competitive and harder to get, the regulatory agencies are able to really focus on achieving deeper set-asides in terms of unit mixes and project averages, which makes the deal more difficult to pencil. I think it was mentioned maybe on the first panel about the Build Back Better bill. One of the key components from an affordable housing perspective on that is to change the 50% test to a 25% test. I'm not sure if I have the language quite right on that, but effectively that would double the bond capacity for states, and that would be huge. Individual projects would take a bit of a financial hit, but the ability for more projects to get done would be there, and we think that's a good thing.
Sarah, as Aon's a group that does kind of all of the above for what we're talking about at the table here, what's been Aon's approach, and what's your experience and thoughts on it?
Well, that's a really wide open question, isn't it? Our approach is, we are building new development wherever and whenever we feel we can compete for tax credits and those types of sources, but we can never build our way out of the affordable housing crisis. And so we have, in the last, I would say 4 or 5 years, really focused heavily on NOAA acquisitions and making sure that we are available to keep and preserve as much of the affordable housing that we feel is at risk of being sold right away. And so we've Aon doubled its size in 18 months by largely through acquisition of NOAA. And one of the things that we are spending a lot of time on right now is the policy side of this. How do we change policy at the state level and at the local level to free up more capital, but also make it more nimble so that NOAA acquisitions are more possible? We are also spending a lot of time working on how do we find and create new funding sources. We're working closely right now with John on capital source. I hope he gets a chance to talk about, because if we don't have nimble capital ready to go, we can't even get the attention of the NOAA sellers, because if they're being presented with the opportunity to sell to a market buyer who's probably got lots of cash, nimble capital, or a nonprofit like ourselves who might take more time and require more contingencies for funding approvals, which path is that seller going to go? And so having the capital ready to go so that we can actually start approaching the sellers before maybe they've even contemplated selling. We can talk to them about when they are ready to sell, keeping their properties affordable and still capturing the value of their property by selling to us instead of to the market rate buyers. So it's a combination of things: policy, funding sources, and both new development and NOAA acquisition.
I'm going to jump in and just say, Sarah, do you want to talk briefly about how you combine NOAA and tax credits on Blooming Meadows?
Oh, sure. Because and we'll just throw in the fact that this all happened during COVID too. So in December of 2019, we acquired a 306 unit building in Bloomington, a block from the Mall of America. At the time, it was called Village Club. And 306 units that the then owner were marketing to national buyers. So the city of Bloomington and Aon worked very closely together to come up with the funding necessary to make that acquisition happen. And in part, it was an opportunity that helped us to get that deal done. And the opportunity was, picture 1969, the way they used to design projects. They put buildings all over the place in the middle of these giant parking lots that made really no sense because you don't need that much parking. And so what we did is we took a lot of the land back from all those parking lots, and we were able to develop a 4% tax credit deal with another 172 units of new housing on the site that the 306 units came with. All of that happened, however, and I'm going to bring this up because the complexity of doing these deals cannot be understated. We had to close on our bonds within 6 months by statute. And that closing date meant July, I think it was 12th of 2020. So we were required to close on that or we would lose the bonds and we wouldn't be able to build the 172 units of housing. And yet every single process required to get to that closing had shut down because of COVID. And so we had to get our lenders, our investors, our service providers, our lawyers, all at the table saying, we're going to figure out how to get this done. And at the end of the day, Aon ended up putting a loan into the deal because everything was changing so dramatically right up until the very end that we didn't even know what our final numbers were going to be until 2 days before closing. And that's when Aon said, these 172 homes are important. We're going to put the money in. But NOAA and LIHTC fit together. It doesn't necessarily mean that the LIHTC deals are going to be any easier to do, but we should be looking at that land as an opportunity to expand our housing opportunities.
John, do you want to take and expand upon that just a bit in regards to other financing sources and things that are upcoming here?
Sure. Thanks, Chris. And thanks, Sarah, for teeing that up. So as has been said by a couple different people, Peter McLaughlin said it and some others, one of the major problems we have is scalability of resources. So you take a project like Village Club or a project like Huntington Place, which is 834 units. And, you know, a project like that would use all of the affordable housing resources that the state has. It's so large. And so you look at NOAA Impact Fund, which is the subsidiary of GMHF that I operate, and it deployed 25 million and it acquired 701 NOAA units. But that's not scalable. We can't, you know, rinse, repeat something like that. And so how do you get to a bigger scale? And one of the things that GMHF is exploring right now, we're talking with the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation about investing some of their endowment in affordable housing, $100 million of it. And the idea is that if we can leverage that resource and maybe other foundations with similar endowments would be willing to participate and kind of get this up to a larger scale, we could go statewide and fund both NOAA preservation and new construction of affordable housing, what we call workforce housing. So it's like new NOAA, except from the ground up. And we'll have the same, you know, time issues, you know, that Sarah and others have described. But we would have ready capital at scale deployed maybe over 5 years. It's not going to happen overnight. And so having that resource identified and available and sort of a known quantity and not a flash in the pan would be super helpful for the development community to, you know, build up capacity and actually do those deals rather than just keep doing what you're doing. Not that what you're doing is bad. It's good. It's all good. But we all know that we need to do more. And this would be one avenue to do that. We know market rate developers are already doing this kind of work in greater Minnesota. And we know that, you know, both for-profits and nonprofits are doing the NOAA preservation work in the Twin Cities. But we need to scale up and do work that's outside of what is really an oversubscribed 3-to-1, 4-to-1 tax credit program. So the idea is that this 100 million, which could be larger, would be second mortgages. A typical deal structure might be a 70% loan to value first mortgage, a 20% second mortgage, and then 10% from the operating partner. And our funds would be 7% cost of capital, interest only, payable out of available cash flow. And if you don't have enough cash flow, then you don't pay the interest or full interest that, you know, quarter, whatever the time frame is. And it would accrue, and you'd pay it later, either in a subsequent period where you had more cash flow or maybe at a refi or at a sale. But that's how that structure would work. And it would be long-term capital. So it might even survive a 10-year or a 15-year refinancing. So if you did a Freddie 10-year loan, and then in 10 years you refi it, our money could stay in the deal for another 10 years or another 15 years. And you could refi your first mortgage at that initial point. And so not having to repay that money, right away, allows the developer to build up some equity and maybe do some other capital improvements later, and make that cost of capital work for the deals. And this is, it's mezzanine debt, but we want to call it second mortgages because mezzanine debt is sort of a pejorative term, I think. And but it's functioning sort of like equity. We would work with both nonprofits and for-profits. The affordability that we would require is 25% market rate, 75% would have to be affordable at 80% or below, 80% AMI or below. And within that affordability component, we'd want to see, the standard 20 at 50 or 40 at 60. But our version of compliance is really light touch. It was talked about earlier, we don't want to displace people that are over income. Of course, on a new construction deal, everybody's just going to meet the requirements when they move in. But on a NOAA deal, if you're over income, you don't have to leave. You can stay or grandfathered in. But we only verify income at move-in. We don't do it annually thereafter. If you qualify when you move in, then you are qualified for that unit for as long as you live there. And that income qualification is not a prescribed methodology like with the tax credit program. It's whatever your property management companies are already doing. You guys are already, certifying somebody's income to know that they can pay the rent, and that's what we need to know. And if they're at 60% or 50% or whatever the limit is for that unit, then they would qualify. So it's very light touch, and that's important because one of the cost drivers on the operations side for tax credit deals is compliance. And we're trying to remove that because we're trying to be affordable, but we're also trying to be market rate affordable, if you will. And we would also require acceptance of Section 8 because that's a valuable tool. People were talking earlier about the need for subsidy, rental assistance. And so that's something that we want to encourage. And so this is all sort of in process now. Don't call me tomorrow and tell me you got a deal because we don't have the money yet. But this is the sort of thing that, we're trying to get operational by, early next year, maybe first or second quarter, depending. So that's a little bit about what GMHF is working on. And we know we're interviewing developers across the state. And, we know that there's a strong interest in doing non-tax credit affordable housing. People are trying to broaden the scale of what they do and start working with different resources because the tax credit program it's valuable, it's important, but it also takes 5 years to get a deal done and there's limited resources there. So if we can scale something else up and leverage this money with, $400 million of first mortgage debt, then we've got something. So that's what we're working on.
Does anyone have comments to that? I mean, it seems pretty good overall, but it'd be interested in any of the panelists to weigh in additionally their thoughts.
Well, I would just say, John, early next year is 3 weeks away. So let's get to it.
Not that early.
One other thing I wanted to mention for those of you that are with municipalities, governmental entities, Minneapolis has a program, and the one nice thing about its NOAA program is it does not have to go to city council. It is an administrative approval, and so it makes it much faster, and the executive director of CPAD can basically tell the city attorney to start drafting documents for a qualified project. So that really helps in terms of that meeting the 90 to 120 day requirement.
Okay, just a few more minutes of the panel here, then we'll open it up for questions. But one other question that open to the panel here is, you can go with it if you.
I guess I didn't make it clear. It's a specific funding program for NOAA is their expedited approval process.
Okay, thank you. One, new challenge to the housing market, particularly in St. Paul, is the new limitation on rent increases. And it's going to have interesting market impacts overall. And what do panelists think how that could impact NOAA and LIHTC deals within the city, as if new market rate is going to be cold for a little while here.
We terminated a purchase agreement based on the passage of the rent. We had a purchase agreement for a project in St. Paul, and it did not pencil out. We're working at renegotiating, purchase price, but it took it off the table. It just did not work. And the one thing is, Mayor Carter is talking about an exception for new construction. Well, that doesn't solve the problem for NOAA. If there's an exception for new construction, what if you do a NOAA deal and you do substantial rehabilitation and you have a 2% limitation on rent increases and you have an old owner that really hasn't been very attentive to the project and not kept rents up to market and not maintained the project at all, it creates real problems.
I think I'm familiar with that deal, Angela. In addition to the uncertainty that is caused, in St. Paul, I don't think the elected leaders and city staff leaders really understand how that ordinance is going to be implemented. And it has created a big kind of vacuum of answers right now. So the deal that Angela referenced, we're trying to get answers on how it will impact our deal, and we can't get answers. And there's a push to go in and modify. Well, I'm not even sure they have the ability to do that without going back to the voters because of the way it passed. In Minneapolis, we have given the right to the city council to affect some type of rent control, and that's just creating a bunch of uncertainty. And so I think what we are going to start to see as a market is a flight of investment to the surrounding jurisdictions, the Edinas and Bloomingtons and Richfields and Rosevilles and all of the places that don't have rent control. I think there's going to be a heat up on investors who want to find NOAA, but don't want to do it with the uncertainty of rent control. They're going to go to those outer suburbs. And that's going to create a whole nother dynamic of NOAA loss for us in communities where this was already an issue. And at the same time, it's going to create, my opinion, it's going to create a stalling effect on the properties that are in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And we're going to start to see those properties decline in condition because we've now capped the rent, but we haven't capped a lot of the other expenses that are not within the ownership control, real estate taxes, utilities, insurance, all of the other things that are going up at a rate much faster than the rent control. And so the only variable expense that ownership can really control is going to be the condition of the properties and the amount they invest in repairing those properties. It was ironic, the week of the election, there was a bunch of press about gas prices going up 20%. Do you all remember that? That was the same week that voters voted to keep rents at 3%, and that math will just never work.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. From the investor's side, since NOAA Impact Fund is an equity investor when we partner on NOAA deals, we have a mission of preserving affordable housing and keeping those rents affordable. But we also have an obligation, a fiduciary obligation to repay our investors. And the way that we can repay our investors is by making sure that the cash flows are coming off the properties sufficient to repay those investors. And if we can't, in partnership with our owner operators, control what the rent revenues look like and what the expenses look like, and the owner operators are definitely, that's their bailiwick, that's what they're responsible for. But we meet annually to talk about the budget for the next year. And if we can't look at that budget and see a way forward, one of the tools that we have is to increase rents, maybe more than 3%. We'd like not to, but if that's what it costs because we need to pay more for utilities and insurance and property taxes and staffing costs are going up, ask any property management company, right? You have to be able to manage that. And if I can't do that as an investor, I'm not going to put my capital in that jurisdiction. So I think for us, investing in NOAA properties in St. Paul is off the table right now. And until there's more definition around the ordinance in Minneapolis, we would probably sort of pause there. And we're just, hopeful that this same thing doesn't happen in other localities, because I agree with some of the comments made by the earlier panelists. This is a reaction to a broken housing market. but it's not a good one. It's not constructive.
I just wanted to sort of piggyback on that Minneapolis and St. Paul are kind of the popular topics right now, but anybody that has a Minnesota Housing First Mortgage knows that rent increases are capped at 5%, which is better than 3%, but it's still a cap. And going forward, of course, the tax credit program fixing your rents at 50% for the life of the project has us a little bit concerned, more than a little bit concerned, as we look out 20 years or 30 years. Are the incomes going to continue to go up enough to support the operations of the property? And regardless of a 3% or a 5% income or rent increase, if we have a stretch where incomes don't increase, rents don't increase, and that lasting for as long as it does under the tax credit program is a worry of ours.
Most of what I would say has been said, but I will just add, and I think Lee Blons did a good job of reframing the issue, which is that there's no doubt, there's no question that the housing system doesn't work for everybody the way it is right now. I think Minneapolis has an opportunity. The voters voted on it. If something is going to move forward, it's an opportunity to look at the big picture and say, what are the outcomes that we want, and how do we get there? And rent control may not be the solution to get the outcomes that we want. And I think we've talked about unintended consequences that come with that. But I agree with everything else right now. There's just so much uncertainty in St. Paul and Minneapolis, which is where we do most of our work, that it's causing, it will cause a decrease in the supply of new housing, and certainly the challenges with NOAA that the other panelists have brought up.
One of the things I don't think we've covered, and I don't know that we have time, but I just wanted to mention, was the issue of rehabilitation expectations and governmental expectations regarding how much rehabilitation you can do on a NOAA project. Everybody's used to LIHTC. LIHTC is substantial rehab. You can go in, you have money, you get equity if you rehab the project. NOAA, you don't have that. And I know Sarah has run into some substantial issues about what the government wants to happen if they're going to give you money versus what's feasible and what will work.
I think that's my cue. So when we doubled in size through acquisition of NOAA, there was an expectation by AN that we would buy these properties and then the community would help us figure out how to find the additional capital necessary to make these properties live for their next life. Because we didn't have time to put all those pieces of funding together during the 90 to 120 days. I think one of them was actually 45 days, which blows my mind. And so we are constantly now looking for funds to do a lot of the upgrades and work that's necessary for these projects. And a lot of the funds are coming from public sector. To Angela's point, they require, their priorities for what needs to be done, or their standard for what level the work needs to be done, is dramatically different than what we're trying to do, which is, can we just get the plumbing to work again? Can we just get the roof to stop leaking? We aren't necessarily worried yet about a lot of the cosmetic things on the property. And so there can be a very long conversation with our public sector partners about what is reasonable with the amount of funds that we have, because there's just never enough funds to actually get the property back into the condition that people are familiar with a LIHTC property. John mentioned the Huntington Place property with 834 one-bedroom units that we acquired in January of 2020. And the numbers on that project are just larger than any pot of funds that might be available anywhere. 834 apartments, that's 2,500, 3,000 people living there. That's the size of the city of Osseo. So do we have the size of the city of Osceo's budget to put into this project? No, we do not. And yet we have to get the plumbing working. We have to get the roofs working. We are actually trying to do a lot of the upgrades that maybe haven't been done for the last 30 years on that property. There's just not enough money.
Josh, final thoughts?
Just one final thought on sort of the human impact around all of this, including any sort of new rules, regulations, or policies that would lead to less NOAA housing in particular, is that one thing that we haven't discussed a ton is housing for people who truly live in poverty, who have no income, and who are experiencing homelessness. And how do we get them from their place of homelessness into housing? And in many cases, their entry point is your mom and pop landlord. Their entry point is a NOAA unit or NOAA property, in part because the rent is low enough for them to get in, as well as that's where a lot of the more flexible people who are willing to work with somebody who works with a program like Beyond Backgrounds, or they have a bit of a shaky background, that's like their entry point. And so when you look at the impact of things like rent control or other rules or policies that might either push mom and pop landlords out of the market or lead to less NOAA housing, it really makes the problem of homelessness and housing for people with really low incomes even worse. One of the ways I like to look at it is that every NOAA unit that's preserved, given how many we've lost, and any new unit that's produced that is in a more affordable rent range, still like things are getting worse more slowly. Like we're not gaining ground. Things get worse more slowly with everything that gets done here. And so to just be so sensitive to the human impact of anything that could happen that causes us to lose NOAA units or have mom and pop landlords exit the market really creates a tremendous amount of pain for the most vulnerable people in our community as well.
All right, with that, we'll open it up for any questions.
There's also a question in the back of the room over there. I saw a hand going.
Do you want to just conquer this online one, then you can go grab a mic while you're in? Okay, the first question online, are panelists aware of any federal incentive programs to preserve affordable housing? They give a couple examples, reduce capital gains or favorable 1031 exchange provisions. So federal programs.
Well, I mean, there's nothing really, I mean, there are proposals. I don't know that there's anything, I mean, there's a toolbox we have. I mean, we use 1031, we use bargain sales, we use, all of the existing resources, but I don't know at this point that there are any specific federal programs targeted towards NOAA.
Federal program Nimble. Federal program Nimble.
So I have a question, something to noodle on. So the agency I work for, we own 2,500 units of affordable housing in Dakota County. We also own all the public housing. We're the voucher program. Carly's over in Washington County in a similar agency. I'm Dakota County. We're also a sub-allocator of tax credits. We're an entitlement community, so we get our own tax-exempt bonds allocated to us, and we're a funder. We have a $10 million first mortgage on Cale Manor down in Burnsville, which was a preservation project. So the thing I'm wondering about on this NOAA effort, where this shows up for us first are vouchers, because that's the most efficient affordable housing tool there is. Get the rent help to the tenant that doesn't have the capacity to pay their rent. So when a Class C apartment building goes on the market and sells and they eject or evict vouchers, that's a utilization problem. We're concerned about that. I'm less concerned about the naturally occurring, the folks who have the capacity to live somewhere else. It's just not affecting my bottom line because I'm not giving them assistance. Is the effort to have a friendly buyer like Aon acquire Class C properties or properties that need a capital improvement? I mean, the public housing program is the same problem. They haven't put enough into the capital improvement. Is that an efficient way to preserve housing for folks who are income qualified, who need income qualification? And I just don't know, because you're chasing the market. The market is jumping in and counting on higher rents to fix that plumbing. And so our concern when we see applicants come in like this, I think this is a conversation we're having is, you know, if I have 120 vouchers in a building, that I'm concerned about. I got 2,700 vouchers. That's a big number. And I got to make sure those folks have a place to rent. But if it's a 300 unit building, am I concerned about the naturally occurring stuff if they're not taking vouchers or if they don't have vouchers? Less so. And so am I willing to put money into where the market will pay for that improvement? So do I really want to gap finance something that's not income qualified? So that's just occurring because the market activity. The 86 Tax Act, as Angela knows, those projects are now, I've got a 30-year project coming up on the end of its 30-year obligation. So that's all coming off the back of the truck too. And those projects are structured with compliance. They've got all the network of everybody in this room who does compliance, income qualifications, all the regime of regulatory that's required there. So my lens is they've got the capacity to keep the mission going and they're trained to do it. My bias is going to be preserve those guys. But as you've pointed out, the sophistication in naturally occurring housing is less. They are less capable of using those resources. They are less capable of understanding the transaction costs and the regulatory costs to continue compliance. So we have to build that. So how do you persuade the guys who have the money and have to distribute and prioritize that that's a cost-effective element when we need more supply? You know, the other competition here is real estate equities comes in and they want to build 120 units. Dominium's, you know, out there using bonds. Everybody's building more supply, and we agree that's a good thing. We got to add more supply so that we can get those garden style folks to improve their properties and stuff like that. So how does this preservation know a concept of buying a friendly buyer, which I think is great? We got to get friendly buyers in that property. How do you compete with those other dollars? I mean, we can always add more money, but how can you compete with that?
Well, one way we do it is by reducing the cost of capital. So the reason that somebody can use NOAA Impact Fund as a source and compete with a market buyer is because our cost of capital was 6.5% for the first phase. It'll be 5.5% or so for the second phase. And that's, you know, compared to, you know, double-digit cost of capital for an institutional, you know, the buyer. And so the institutional buyer needs to raise the rents in order to cover that cost, whereas our lower cost of capital allows the rents to stay more affordable.
So to get that spread, to get that benefit, what is the requirement of the investor? Is it a per unit? Is it the whole? What are you looking for? I would say you have to take a voucher. We don't finance any project in Dakota County that doesn't accept a voucher.
Yeah, we require vouchers. We require our owners
All
to
of them.
accept vouchers. Yep.
I mean, all the units. No, you don't require all the units, right? You're not, that spread is available to the whole project.
What we do is we require 75% of the units to be affordable.
Got it.
The other 25 can be market rate. And the idea is that the 25% that are market rate, if they have higher rents, that helps sort of cross subsidize the affordable units. So we have to use different tools to try to get that affordability, and that's one of them.
There's another part of your question though, and that is why does NOAA prioritize with those other things that you're focusing on? And I think we need to broaden our thinking on this and say, first of all, we can never build our way out of the homeless or out of the affordable housing crisis that we are in. There's just never going to be enough money, never enough land, can't do it. We are losing NOAA at such a fast clip that if we don't start to curb that trend, there aren't going to be places for people to go, even if they have vouchers. So we need to start making sure that the universe of housing is available. And then lastly, we need to think about this. Dollars are fungible. if we are displacing, like John mentioned, the crossroads at Penn, when we displaced 698 families, the school said, hey, wait, where are our students? And the local workforce said, where are our workers? And the amount of public resource and private resource that it took to restabilize those 698 families, plus the surrounding community, was a huge cost to the system. So I think we need to be thinking about this more than just where did the vouchers go, and really how do we make the whole system more efficient and candidly more humane in how we're dealing with housing for our community.
And since I thought you were going to add this one, and preservation is cheaper than new construction.
Right, and more environmentally friendly too.
All right. That's all we have time for. I'm off here. All right. Thank you. That's all we have time for. Great panel. Great discussion. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Pick up material so I don't have.
Thanks, everyone. Make sure